Hi, podcast listeners. My name is Madison Hopkins, and this is Modern Ways. Modern Ways is a guide to eco-friendly homes. And on this podcast, I combine sustainability and real estate for people who want to change their home environment. In each episode, my guests and I empower you with fundamental knowledge so you can create your eco-friendly home and thus change the world around you. Thanks for tuning in today. I really appreciate you being here and hope you learned something new. So, let's hop on in to the modern ways of eco-friendly homes. Hi, podcast listeners. On today's episode, we have Wanda Osterman. Wanda is going to tell us all about going pesticide-free in the home. So she and I met through the Green Team Academy, which a few of you have probably heard me say a couple times now. We did a Power Weekend workshop together, and we are both mentors for the International Climate Action Challenge. Wanda's mentorship is all about going pesticide-free. So let's get started. Wanda, let's start off by introducing you. Who are you? Why are you here? Tell us how you began to learn about going pesticide-free.
Sounds good. Hello, everyone, and welcome to all the listeners and people watching. I'm really excited to be with you today. And yes, I love non-toxic stuff. I want to stay healthy. I want my environment healthy. I want my pets healthy. I want people's kids to feel like they're healthy. And on top of that, I also think about soil biology. And so the little critters underneath the ground that most of us don't really consider as important are actually very important to the well-being of our properties. And so today I'd love to talk to you a little bit about that. My reason for kind of getting started into all of that was because I live across from a park where I watch a lot of non-toxic products being used, as well as toxic products being used. And the combination didn't quite make sense to me as to why would you do that? Why would you try to use conventional methods that can damage the soil and the plants and thus also the ecosystem and the wildlife in the park? And in the meantime, try to do things that are more organic, counterproductively against one another. And so I was on a journey and a quest to figure out how to do that and to make sure that people who have properties around my communities here in the Denver area, but really all over the nation, know that there is a different way to do this and that we can take care of our land organically.
I love that. Yeah, so you've told me once before about this story about a dog in the park, and I think you know which one I'm referencing. Could you tell our listeners that story?
Sure. Well, it's dogs and kids, but definitely I have a dog myself. And, you know, when it gets really warm in the Denver area and the sun is beating down on you, the first thing you go looking for is a tree. And around the tree is a lot of shade. And dogs generally love to be in the shade and lay down close to the tree trunks. For me, I think that's a wonderful vision to see. But if you don't know what happened a half hour before, or maybe even 5 minutes before, and you didn't notice that there was a truck that came by from the Department of Park and Rec, who then dumped a bunch of basically Roundup around the edges and corners of the tree trunk, you wouldn't be so happy if you knew that was your dog laying there panting and, you know, sweating, and maybe you're even giving him some water right there. There's a lot of exposure to the toxin, and that's very dangerous for dogs. And there are dogs that do die from toxicity, also from people's lawns, not just from parks. And so I thought that was a terrible thing to see. As well as often there's, you know, a kid or an owner along with that dog who sits down for a minute and they're putting their hands on the grass and around the area where the Roundup is. And often you can't feel it or see it. And if you happen to put that in your eye, or you're eating something and it comes in with your food, it can just be very dangerous for you. So the danger of health and safety really got me involved. And, you know, dogs can't figure it out. They can't read signs that say pesticide spray, or, you know, we see a lot of those around parks every now and then on corners of people's lawns, but they don't know. They're going to go trotting through it. And it's up to humans to be aware and to keep ourselves safe.
Yeah, I think that I'm really glad we've touched onto that so quickly into the podcast, that the danger of pesticides, and part of it being so dangerous is that we don't know it's there. We, with our naked eye cannot confirm this half of the street doesn't use pesticides. This half of the street does. Like, I'm going to walk my dog over here. I'm going to let my child play in this grass. And that's just, I don't have a kid, and I don't have a dog either. I live in a very small apartment. So, but yeah, I mean, even without those things in my life, I still care about that because I don't want other people to be exposed to that. And I don't want one day, like, a future child of mine, like a future dog of mine, to get exposed to this. And I don't want to be walking around. I love to be barefoot, but I don't want to walk around in toxic grass and bring it into my house unknowing to myself. You taught me about that.
Yes, exactly. A lot of people aren't aware of the fact that just because you have shoes on, that, that doesn't mean that you're not walking whatever you are walking on in the grass back into your own home. And it's not meant to like freak you out and scare you to such a level that now you're, phobic about it all. But it is something that you should consider, because the problem is in many states, including in Colorado, the law basically for the Department of Park and Recreation, when they do something in their parks, is that they have to put up a sign while they are spraying. The minute they're done, without any rest, without any break time in between, the little pesticide sign, we all know them, they kind of look like this. Those little pesticide signs are up and gone. And you come 3 minutes later, you don't even see the remnants of the truck or the guys with the pack on, with the masks on. And I generally say to myself, well, why are they wearing the masks and why do they have these bodysuits on? And I'm going down there with my flip-flops or maybe barefoot with my shorts and sitting down in the grass, and it's getting into, my follicles and my skin. And I don't know that. I just thought it was damp and dewy because we have that in the mornings or afternoons sometimes. So yeah, that is a big concern for me, that those signs probably should be left up longer, or there should be some kind of an app that notifies people. There's a lot of parents that drop off their kids, or just teenagers that go on their own, and they are totally unaware of the fact that that's what's happened just before they get to the park to play their recreational sports, or maybe to do their homework, or just take a nap. Or you see a lot of workers in between lunchtime going and sitting in the shade in the park. It's used for those things. And for me, even further than that, which sounds kind of sad, but it's your tax dollars, because it's the Department of Park and Rec. It gets paid through your tax dollars. So you are funding pesticide spray in your own park, which just doesn't work to me. And it's the same thing with synthetic fertilizers. They have a lot of harsh chemicals to them, and there are people that get very bad rashes and reactions. And then they go to the doctor, and the first thing is, well, where were you today? Well, I was in the park. Well, you must be allergic to grasses. Well, maybe I am allergic to grasses, but they don't do a pesticide test on people. They just do a grasses test on people. And so you start to figure out, like, okay, maybe it isn't the grass, because it doesn't show that I'm that itchy and I'm not getting bad reviews from that particular test. I wonder what else it could be. And often it is the pesticide and or the synthetic fertilizer, which is the same with a lot of dogs that have irritation to their skin and find themselves licking their paws a lot. Once they start licking, it opens up their skin follicles, which then agitates the chemical and lets the chemical inside and makes them want to lick it even more because it's sore. So it's a big cycle. And it's a sad cycle that we can prevent and we can do something about.
Yeah, I've actually never even thought about that with the grass test, that there's not a "Are you allergic to pesticides" test. And I wonder if they did have an "Are you allergic to pesticides" test, how many people would come back yes?
Oh, yeah. I'm sure that there is a pretty good evidence to that, as many doctors have already said, especially exposure for younger children who do not have as good of a defense system as we do yet, because they're just not older and their bodies are not ready to take on a lot of those types of outside environmental indications. But even for adults and also for aged individuals, there is definitely a harm to having exposure to pesticides and synthetic fertilizers. Yeah.
Well, you said there is a solution to that, so I don't want to get we can tangent forever, and we probably will continue to tangent because there's so much, and I also like to be informed about these sorts of things. But I do want to educate the listeners on what you were just about to get into, which is the solutions to this.
Yes. So there are a few different solutions. If you want to do something about getting any Department of Park and Recreation, or if you're part of a neighborhood registered association or organization, or you are part of a HOA, a homeowner association, the approach is obviously a little different because it's not your property. So you have to go through different steps. And that's where advocacy really helps, doing letter writing, finding out what is being done. You can do different requests of what is being done around the soil near your home. And once you find those things out, there are definitely groups, a lot of nonprofit groups that are involved. So one is called Beyond Pesticides. They are very good at letting you know what the ingredients are that you've been given once you've made this request, and to potentially give you some solutions as to what to provide as a transition to other products that are much more healthy. Some of them are still not great because many of them right now, unfortunately, are out there that are more conventional, but more and more organic land care products are being created, and plans on how to do things, which is called an integrated pest management system. And there are people that have training for that, and hopefully you can help find those people and educate both the board members, or share with your city council that you really want these things to change. It's the same thing with your school. You could talk to a facilities maintenance person and try to find out, well, how often do you do it, and what is it that you're using, and then come back with some solutions. So Beyond Pesticides has a lot of different solutions. Another group that I do a lot of stuff with and have just gotten accredited through is the NOFA standards for organic land care. So I don't know if your readers can kind of read that.
Yep, the podcast listeners just heard you say it, but I'll read this. And what does the subtitle say?
Go ahead, yes.
Practices for the Design and Maintenance of Ecological Landscapes. That's NOFA, Standards for Organic Land Care.
Yes, they are also a nonprofit, and they provide a lot of training for landscapers, also for people who do golf courses, people who do large facilities, for corporations, the big properties around them. So they're a wonderful resource, and there's a lot for free on their website, and I highly suggest that people maybe take a look at that for some tips and ideas. But really, to get started in your own yard is to, first of all, tell yourself, I can do this. Like, this doesn't have to be scary. Yay, right? Exactly. A lot of people are afraid to change, and a lot of people are in a place where they don't know what to do, so they don't do it, and every year you kind of do the same thing, or you have a landscaper who does the same thing, and you're not even paying attention to what that person does because your number one goal is green grass. Well, there's a lot to be said for green grass, and that's a whole nother topic in and of its own. Not every region should have as much green grass as it does. So we try very hard also to educate people to convert some of their grass spaces either into pollinator-friendly places with beautiful flowers and the ability to give some wildlife back to the ecological system by providing biodiversity in the plant landscape, but also looking and making sure that you're using a lot of native plants, because native plants are used to the region and they know how to survive better than a lot of the pretty plants that we may think we want to have to look at. They also function, and their function is to create deeper roots and to make your soil healthier and to be able to uptake more water and to be more drought resistant in our region. So those things are very, very beneficial. But when it comes to getting rid of pesticides, it becomes easier if you start to incorporate that into your landscape. More trees, more shrubs, more wildlife flowers, more native plants. All of those also bring back the beneficial animals that help get rid of the pests. So if you don't have birds in your landscape, then what is supposed to eat the grubs in your lawn, right? And if you don't have butterflies and you don't have bees, then what is supposed to pollinate maybe the vegetable garden that you're trying to grow? So you have to look at this as like a real systems thinking approach. You can't just say, I want my green grass and I don't know how to get it other than to use synthetic fertilizers, and I want to get rid of the grubs, and so I'm going to make sure that I use some kind of toxin to do that. One of the things that I love, and it's a really good little brochure, I'll again mention this again, it's through NOFA, but it says your organic yard can be your reality. And on the back of it, and I'll read this for some of your readers, but you can kind of take a look at the little brochure here that can be found on their website. On the back of it, it basically talks about increasing your soil health is very important. So one of the first things you need to do, or your landscaper needs to do, is to actually figure out, do you even need synthetic fertilizers and pesticide, or is your soil pretty healthy? And leave it alone. So many people think, oh my gosh, it's a little yellowing. Yeah, it's a little yellowing because it's been really hot outside, or maybe you overwatered. And there's nothing wrong with the soil, and it doesn't need any of the fertilizer that you're giving it, and you're over fertilizing. And when you do that, you actually burn it and it gets more yellow. And if you put pesticide spray on it, which is very harsh, it can't rebound. And so it gets even more yellow. And then this vicious cycle starts to happen. And I literally, with my hands, I'm drawing this circle for people that can't see what we're talking about. A vicious cycle happens because you are now thinking that you are doing something beneficial, which is actually making it more harmful for the soil. So you have to first get a soil test, and they're $10, guys. If we renovate our homes, we spend more than $10. If we buy a new home and we want our property to look beautiful, you should take a soil test. I mean, that's the easiest thing to do. You send it over to your local university. You can look up your local university. They do the soil testing for you. You give them the $15, you get this little sheet, and you either read it yourself and it tells you what you need to do, what your soil is lacking, or maybe that it isn't, in which case just let it be. But you can also provide it for your landscaper. And that's another good way to kind of have a communication with them about, I really want to go more organic. Is there a way you can help me with that? Can you transition me, over time into something like that? The other thing that I really tell people is important, that is also on this list, is...
Oh, before you get to that second, I want to ask, do all universities have the soil test capabilities? So like people maybe in a more rural area or in not the state of Colorado, do they have access to soil tests?
Absolutely, yes. It may not always be through universities. Sometimes it's through botanic gardens. Sometimes a nursery may have a way to link you to a resource. But if you look up online yourself, what can I do in my state to get a soil test? Something will pop up. It's a pretty easy search. And most of the time it will be some kind of a university that is state-run. A lot of state-run universities do agricultural programs, and so they will have the ability to do these soil tests for you. And the first one is really just a basic one where you find out more about the nutrients that are missing and lacking. The deeper ones, if you want to pay more, which is great if you want to go further into it, will actually tell you also about the microbial life, whether you have a lot of worms in there, whether there are a lot of tiny little critters that are keeping your soil healthy and your plants healthy. And that's all really needed. But most of us don't think about that because it's all under the ground. But yes, you can. You can always find something in your state.
That's so cool. Yeah.
So let's see, the other thing is to find someone, right? If you do need a landscaper, find someone that's willing to work with you. Some of them are not trained or they're not well trained. And so work with them and tell them what you've learned. Reach out to people who can help you, like myself. You're welcome to reach out to me if not all of you do it at once, but I can, send you to resources and direct you to people. And from there, you work with someone who's excited to help create a healthy soil. And when you have a healthy soil, you can conserve so much water. Really big point here. Most of us in Colorado spend way, way too much time watering our plants and our lawns. And most of that is going back in as water runoff, which is very dangerous for our community. In Colorado, it's something to really be concerned about because we're the Rocky Mountains, for goodness sakes. This is like the pristine Rocky Mountain image that is going completely awry because more and more suburbs are being built. More and more HOAs have landscapers that take care of the properties around your area with pesticides and synthetic fertilizers. More and more people are coming from areas that are wanting organic, but not finding enough landscapers that can do organic. I think one of the big things really we need to think about when we think about water conservation is the types of plants that we select. in our landscape around our homes really have an impact on water runoff. If you have plants that have deeper roots, they help hold the soil and they help hold the moisture in the soil. So that way you don't get this quick running river that all of a sudden you see when people leave their sprinklers on too long, going out over our streets, and nobody really maybe thinks about the fact that those end up in riverways and in our groundwater. And if those are laced with pesticides or synthetic fertilizers, you're going to end up with a lot of problems running down into our water sources, which then have to be cleaned out even more. And it's just a really bad cycle. So that's why I think you can do a lot with land care to help out the ecological system as well as the environmental system. So it's cheaper to keep your water not running, and it's cheaper to not have to worry about trying to replace parts of the environment that are getting ruined because of pesticides and synthetic fertilizers that are coming off our landscapes. But kind of blowing into that and out of that section into the next one, I think a good transition that you also mentioned is really that it's also important that we look at biodiversity of our plants that we select. And so not having one type of tree or one type of grass or one type of flower that is our favorite and that we love. We can certainly have that in the landscape around us, but it's really beneficial to add other plants that provide something for nature. And specifically, one of the things that you can do if you are new to a community to kind of, reach out and be friendly with your new neighbors or with individuals and nonprofits or maybe with some eco leaders in town is to really advocate for yourself, but also with those individuals that you want to do something about it. A really good group that I love to recommend to people is People and Pollinator Action Network group. That is a Colorado-based Denver area place that you can start networking with. There's wonderful leaders there, and there are great resources and references for people who want to start pollinator gardens, which is about the most fun way to get started in this and not quite as scary and intimidating for people. I also love recommending that you go to the Denver Botanic Gardens and take a look at the section there that is implemented just only for pollinators. So you can really take a look at some of these beautiful plants that you can select from that provide something for the birds, the bees, the butterflies, and all of that that we need in our landscape to basically help us with pest management. As weird as that sounds, sometimes one pest is actually a beneficial pest and gets rid of other pests, and then you won't need as much of the toxins to get rid of the bad pests. So really, really important, increase the biodiversity in your landscape and allow yourself to enjoy a variety of different plants, but also allow nature to benefit from you making those choices around your garden.
So when you started to talk about the water and how the roots hold the water in place, does that help the biodiverse underground and all of the underground stuff?
Sure, absolutely. We don't usually think about these things, but everything is connected. And so there is definitely a situation where if you were to look underground, you would see that different microorganisms have a very symbiotic relationship with different types of plants. And different types of plants have roots that go much deeper. So having a mixed situation where you have mixed types of grasses as opposed to just Kentucky fescue or something, but you actually mix it in with some clover or some white clover, or you mix it in with some different types of varieties of grasses that are both shade tolerant and cool and warm tolerant, because we have such a variety of weather, as you would know right now. We go from very warm days to very cold days, and not all grasses are very adaptable to that. So having a mixture allows you to have more of a diverse type of grass turf, which then lasts longer and stays greener and is much healthier underneath, because the root systems are all very different for each of these different grasses. And therefore you can get rid of a lot of pests because you won't have as much compaction, which happens when there is not enough movement from the roots pushing out the soil in different areas, and everything gets really stuck and is like a big mud clot, and things start to die, and you get a lot more dandelions and other weeds showing up, and you start getting a lot of little animals that are considered more pest-like animals that end up ruining, little grubs that end up ruining your lawn. So if you have a diverse lawn, and diverse plants, you're really helping out the little ecosystem around your home.
Is it common for people to have a variety of grass in their yard?
No, most people move in and they keep the grass they have. And if you're lucky, you will find a neighbor that moves in and decides that, oh, there's a little rough patch, and they come in and they put a bunch of seed down and they fertilize it and they hope that something pops up. And in general, something will pop up, because if you provide enough nutritional value, something will come up for a while. But will it remain healthy? And will it actually sustain itself for a long term? Likely it's not going to do that. And that's when people get really frustrated and they start hiring other people to help them out, because what happens is you get really patchy lawns, and that is not very attractive, and people want nice green looking lawns that are healthy. So then it sort of depends on the landscaper that you're working with, and some will work with you in an organic way, and some will just throw a lot of fertilizer on it to get it to grow. But the root systems are so shallow that you are watering and overwatering, and you're fertilizing and often over-fertilizing, and therefore you're getting into this really bad cycle of you need to fix what isn't broken and you need to break what isn't fixable. It's kind of like this weird continuum. So I really recommend that people look at getting mixed seed for overseeding their grasses, and that way they'll get a really nice healthy lawn.
That's actually really interesting, because then instead of having very green grass at one part of the year, and really dead grass, it sounds you could have like decent grass throughout the year.
Absolutely, yes. And decent grass that does not have anything bad in it, so that if you have little critters that are coming around, they're not going to get poisoned by it. Or if you have a dog or a family member that likes to play on the soil or near the soil and the grass, that they don't have any of the toxic lacing on their fingers. Yeah.
That's such a good concept. It made me so happy when you said a family member who likes to play in the grass. I'm like, that's me.
We often forget too that we have neighbors that don't always see the invisible fences, right? Not everybody has a fence or a wall around their property. And so if you have a toddler that is next door that's playing with its mom, or his or hers mom, I guess I should say, you don't really go outside and say, oh my gosh, don't go on my soil, don't go on my grass because I just had pesticide spray on it, right? Or I just fertilized it. There aren't a lot of people that do that for each other. And often it's not because they don't mean to, it's often because they're not around when it's happening. And the mother on the other side, or maybe the father, doesn't know, or the babysitter, that you've just done this. And you can get rashes from things like this. And it is very bad, especially for children.
So I guess that kind of brings us back to the neighborhood advocacy groups. So not only could you join a group and say, this is what I want, but you could also create neighborhood communication and let all your neighbors know, on Friday I'm having my lawn done with pesticides, and your neighbors don't have to agree with it, but just knowing that, like, okay, don't walk your dog in their yard today or something.
Right. And that's where these little pesticide signs pop up. It's just that it's become so common that not every landscaper leaves them, because a lot of people don't want to have sort of that vision of, I am the one using pesticide in my neighborhood to keep my lawn this way. And also sometimes they get left forever, and you kind of wonder, okay, so when's the last time that this was done or not? And you ignore the sign, which is even worse, because now you're taking a big risk because it could have been done or it could not have been done, and you're not really certain whether it has or hasn't. The rule, the law, the legal situation, both in parks and around people's landscape, is that it must be up in all corners of the property that someone can access. And that's it, only when it is being applied. The minute it is done being applied, it can get ripped out of the ground, and the person can drive away or go back into their home, and no one else would be aware of it. So I personally am grateful, even if I don't like the fact that somebody is using pesticides or synthetic fertilizers, I'm grateful that they leave the sign up for a day or two, because quite honestly, it can take that long for all of these toxins to get into the soil. And that means that if somebody happens to come by, whether it's a pet of yours, or whether it is a wildlife, or whether it is a child or an adult playing there, they're not going to know if the sign isn't there. And unfortunately, wildlife can't read it at all, so they're not going to know at all. But at least you can maybe be nice enough to shoo the squirrel away or the bunny or whatever it is, and hopefully they won't stay there, and eat the grass.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your work that you do for just a little bit with the Climate Action Challenge. You're out there helping people, just like on this podcast, you're sharing your information.
Yes,
so,
I have. People want to know, and I think part of it is I'm glad that people want to know. It's your choice to do what you like. It is your home. After all, you paid for it, and it's your property and you're responsible for it. What I love is that more and more people are thinking, yes, there is something I can do, and yes, I should be part of the solution, and yes, I should share that solution with other people once I've learned it. There are some tricky things, but there is plenty of things that are not nearly as hard as buying a home and getting it renovated. So I always like to kind of tell people, if you're in for a renovation project, include your landscaping in that. Don't just leave it dangling out there. Find out what you can do to make it a place that is a healthy ecosystem around your property line. So one of the things that I love to try to get people involved with is to find out what is going on your property by taking a soil sample test, sending it out to your local, usually it's a college, and you can look that up. I started that in the beginning of the podcast, but it's really important that you know what's in there so that you don't over fertilize and that you don't end up adding more stuff that doesn't even need to be in there and spending a lot of money on things that aren't necessary, for one, and often can either burn or ruin whatever plants are there if you overuse them. And then the other piece is to really find out what kind of products you can use. And I am making lots of different brochures, and I'm just kind of handing it out to neighbors, or if I'm at a park, I give it to people who are at the tot lot, and they happen to see the Park and Rec doing something, and it's like, well, you could do this or you could do this, and you just kind of have something to start a conversation with, a little tiny pamphlet to let them know and make them aware of options and opportunities that they may not be certain of how to find those resources. So that's really important. I think I constantly keep telling people, because it's the easiest way, is if it is an OMRI listed product, it will have a little logo, a little label somewhere on the product. Those are always safe. There are other ones that are also safe, or certainly considered safer and acceptable under the organic landscaping rules. But that's one that's really easy to find. It's like the little butterfly on your food. You're like, oh, cool, non-GMO. And we've learned that little icon. So I always try to tell people, whenever you go to any big box store, if it doesn't have that, please try to find something else until you're aware and have learned more about some of the other products. There's lots of research you can do, but you can also just be a part of a group, like People and Pollinators, or you can be part of a wildlife group, an Audubon group. You can learn things from the Denver Botanic Gardens. You can learn things through Beyond Pesticides. You can learn things through non-toxic communities. All of these websites are so fantastic, and they provide so much information. You can learn to do letter writing campaigns locally, or to some of your civic leaders, to see if you can make change happen, not just with the 3 or 4 neighbors that you have, but throughout your whole city, or maybe even throughout your whole state by trying to change legislation.
And that's something you've done, isn't it? Is a lot of legislation change?
I am working on that with groups, yes. It's very difficult to do in Denver. Every state is a little bit different on how they move and where they stand, and that's also very important to find out. There are different states that have preemptive laws, which means that they try to do things to prevent lawns from not being green, whereas others will say, well, we're going to see, and if it isn't a green lawn anymore, then we'll start working on different things, or to prevent bugs from coming, as opposed to we have a tolerance level up to a certain amount, and then if it's too much, we start using things. So there's a very different way, and those are called IPMs, Integrated Pest Management Programs. Every state is allowed to do it differently, and so you really need to figure out what that is. Now, that doesn't mean that your HOA or your community, like your RNO, would be doing it under that, but they need to have some kind of system to make sure that all neighbors are kind of doing the same thing. Because if I'm doing all organic and someone else isn't, then we're still creating problems in the system itself of our community. And that can be very harmful to everyone. And right now, that is where we stand. We are not certain what other people do, and we are not certain what our city does for us. Until we start asking those questions and start setting some standards, it's going to be very, very difficult to keep our environment safe in our communities.
Okay, wow. Yeah, I didn't realize that at all.
It's something that needs to be learned, and I love to share it with people. And I am certainly not the only advocate in this. There are many more people involved and included. Through the challenge, I will be taking 10 individuals and going through a training program. So if any of your listeners are interested, I can train people on how to create a successful pollinator garden for next spring. And that will also include a lot of information about how to be organic in the process of landscaping around your property. So please let your listeners know that they're welcome to reach out to me, and I would love to help them with that as part of my challenge for this year.
I absolutely will. I would definitely put all the names that you've mentioned in the podcast show notes, pollinators and stuff like that, and your email as well.
Perfect. I appreciate that. Yes. And I think I would like to read a little something, if that's okay. I don't have everything off the top of my head, but I love to sort of read this to people to get them involved. But basically, one of the things that's really important to remember is that everything is connected, right? It's a systems thinking approach. And so managing your yard as an ecosystem produces a healthy, balanced, and attractive outdoor space with less effort, cost, and maintenance to you. Biodiversity, ecological cycles, and soil life support healthy plants, animals, and people. Do yourself a favor. Make the switch from conventional to organic landscaping and just say no to the use of toxic chemicals and synthetic fertilizers, both of which harm many of the living systems around our homes. So a couple of things we can do. We can cut the chemicals of pesticides and take that out of our programs. We can cut the cost of repeating all these chemical applications by just allowing nature and the soil organisms and the pollinators and the compost and the various plants and beneficial insects to do their job for free. Think about that. That's a concept that's like unheard of. People want things for free from nature, and nature will give you something beautiful if you don't harm it. If you continue to harm it, it will not be able to sustain itself. So I really love to kind of push that and say to people, you don't even need to mow as often. All these things change the minute you start to let your soil interact with the sun naturally, with the compost naturally, with the little beneficial bugs underneath the soil naturally, with the correct plant selection. Once you start doing all those things, it's actually like free time for you to enjoy being in your garden and playing on it and not having to be scared and nervous of what's going on. We've created sort of this, like, you have to have a landscaper help you and you have to do these things to make your lawn look green. Sometimes your lawn is not going to be green because nature has thrown a curve at you, and that's okay. You know, we don't all have our perfect hair day, and we don't have our perfect makeup day, and we don't have, you know, our outfits fitting us right every day. And so your lawn needs a break, and your plants need a break every now and then too, and they will heal themselves. Unless you have a very bad infestation, in which case people can help you with that. And that's when you really need to bring a professional in and say, something's going wrong. And it's usually because the soil is no longer healthy and it needs help to become healthy. So I love saying that to people. You need to harness the force of nature.
Yeah, I really like the analogy that you gave. Like, we're not perfect every day. Why should we expect our lawns to be perfect every day? Expect Mother Nature to be perfect every day. I'm really thankful that you are providing this information to people and that you have 10 slots available for mentees. One thing I would love to see, like, as a real estate agent is when I walk in to show someone a home, that either, you know, I would love to see them, that yard already be xeriscaped, you know, having a less water use. And that doesn't have to mean rocks, but it could mean, well, I guess xeriscape does, but
The use of good mulches. Mulch is
yeah.
still part of a xeriscape, and sometimes it's leaving the leaves on the ground instead of, doing other things that are not natural. So yes, that's part of xeriscape. It's a wonderful thing to do that, and not everybody can switch to it. Some people end up doing edible plants in between some of their garden. Some
Which
people
is super cool.
which is super cool. Some people have, dwarf trees if they have small properties that have fruits on them that are really great for the environment, and again, have a different root system from the grasses. Some people end up putting little water features somewhere so that they can collect the runoff off the rooftops, and then they have this beautiful waterscape area. So there's a lot of different ways to approach it. But it doesn't always have to be lawn, and you don't always have to convert the whole lawn. You can just take a section at a time. Herb gardens can be great as well. A lot of people enjoy cooking with the herbs that they can make from home, and you can also bring that inside so you don't have to stop having interaction with the plants once it gets cold outside. They're easily transferable as opposed to bringing a tree in, which is much harder. But there's lots of different ways that we can get involved with plant life and animal life and the diversity around our properties.
I have my one little plant that I've had for a while.
Yay! Looks good and green.
I know, she's like the only one that survives. I'm not a succulent mom. I can't. I don't know what that's supposed to do. I'm from Louisiana. Things need to be wet, right? Plants are supposed to be wet. That's what
you learn. And yet it's really interesting. The more you learn about different types of roots and different types of native plants, the more you learn that actually in Colorado, there are very few plants that want a lot of water. Most plants actually don't want a lot of water. We're overwatering them, and that's part of why they become weak. And then that's why the bugs that are out there start to prey on them, because they are a weak plant. And if we don't have the beneficial bugs around anywhere to come and attack those bugs that kill our plants, then that's when we lose our landscape very quickly. And there are other locations like in Tahoe where individuals, people, humans came and said, oh, let's plant all the same kind of monocrop, meaning one type of tree or one type of flower or one type of different plant. And what happens is at some point, there can be a weakness to that plant, and then all of a sudden, one little bug comes in and just obliterates the whole thing. So we have that a lot with the ash trees in Denver. A lot of ash trees were planted around the same time. They're all aging around the same time, and a little critter figured that out and came, and now we have these ash burrow bugs. And they are very harmful, and because of the fact that there are not many healthy trees left, many of them are older, they are just totally taking up the strength of the tree, and many of these trees have to get cut down in all the same neighborhoods. And when you think about it, in real estate, trees and parks are a big part of what makes the real estate price go up. People want to live around that. They love the natural shade. They love the feel of being in nature. And a lot of people enjoy it because it helps with wind or even too much snow, kind of getting too much on your property. And it's just a great feeling of being in nature. Well, imagine if various streets all of a sudden, like we have 6th and 7th Street that have all these trees, these beautiful rows of trees, if they all end up having to be cut down at the same time because they're weak and the branches are starting to fall on cars and it's disrupting road and traffic, and they're falling on power lines and they're falling on houses and they're creating all this damage. And then you get a little tiny 4-foot tree planted there. Your whole neighborhood is going to have a very different feel. And unfortunately, that little tiny plant doesn't get much care. And many of them are all monocrop again. So we're back at that same system.
That's so interesting, Wanda. I never thought about that before, that those trees are all going to die about the same time.
They're all going to get weak around the same time. And no matter how you treat them, whether it's with chemicals or without chemicals, nature needs to balance itself. That's why we need a biodiverse situation. And part of the advocacy we're trying to do with the Department of Park and Recreation is that when they do have plants dying, please don't keep planting the same thing. Create a variety, because if you don't, you're going to end up having all of these parks that are just lawns. And most people enjoy the shade in parks. A lot of people play in the parks, and when you get hot and sweaty, you want to go under a tree. But if it's always going to be the same type of tree, and these trees all age at the same time, and all of a sudden they have to be knocked down or they fall down on their own and they get removed, a 4-foot tree does not provide any shade. So, we need to balance that out. And it is something that we're working with, and there are groups around. So these are other advocacy opportunities that you can do if you don't want to do it necessarily with your own land care. You can also do it with the care around your community. If you live in an apartment or a condo or a townhouse and you don't have a lot of property, but you love being near nature, then advocate on behalf of the parks near your area.
I like that a lot. Yeah, Cheeseman Park in Denver. For those of you who walk Cheeseman a lot, you'll know what I mean. But there's like 2 red trees along the side, the southbound side. And I thought that was really interesting to come across these 2 red trees because I hadn't seen them at the park. And then there's a bunch of trees there that create those little yellow blossoms in the spring.
There were groups that were with the Botanic Gardens, and they started advocating that we needed more biodiversity, and they are right there by Cheeseman Park. So, having that professional ability to connect people and network people and to find people that are willing to figure out how to get these resources together is the best way to do it. It takes money. It also takes just people saying it, people asking for it, people continuing to ask for it, and at some point something will get done.
Yeah, well, I'll definitely need to connect with the Denver Botanical Gardens because you've mentioned them a few times. It sounds like a resource.
It is, and it's really wonderful to go there and be able to look at all the different native plants and to see what thrives and survives there. Even at that location, they have problem spots, and they have to change them out year after year because it just doesn't work. Certain things are on slopes and the water is, running off, and so the soil is slipping and the plants are slipping and it doesn't work. And then other areas are much drier where there's a lot of sun, and so in those areas they've put a lot more plants that are used to being drought tolerant. Whereas there's other sections that are a lot of trees around, and you'll find a lot of understory under the trees that are great at living in the shade. And so you have to look at your little microclimates and your sun and your shady areas to find out where something really wants to survive. But I will guarantee you that if you do that, your yard is going to be awesome. It's going to be beautiful. It's going to have a lot of great memories for you to be around there. You're going to be really happy to look at it and to know that it's providing something not only for your family, but for nature.
So I have one more question for you then, Wanda.
Sure.
So I don't have a yard. I still live in an apartment, but maybe one day I'll have a yard, and we could get into it, but we just kind of don't. Like, maybe we're a little timid. What's some advice?
Well, if you like shade and you like a tree, my advice is to go and join something like Tree People. It's very easy to learn about. Trees do not die nearly as much as little baby plants. They tend to, be a little more sturdy and wholesome, and they have got, deeper roots, and so they're not quite as fragile. So that is a really good place to start out with, is a tree. If you're indoors, I love money trees because who doesn't like money? They say it's good for you, but they don't tend to die very quickly. One thing that's very different is growing something outdoors versus growing something indoors. And learning the difference in that will probably help people, because a lot of people are afraid to grow something outdoors because they've always grown indoors and not succeeded. And then the minute they try to do something outdoors, it's like, wow, nature takes over. Your indoor light bulbs are not the same as the sun. Plants need the normal sun. They need normal life cycles. They need temperature changes. They need to have some wind. They need to have, little breezes or whatever. So you don't provide that inside. There are some plants that are great at being able to live indoors, but they're far and far fewer. And they don't provide anything with connectivity as far as like birds and butterflies and bees, because you don't want those inside. You want them outside. So the symbiotic relationship with nature is a lot less in your home. And also, you generally will have a little potted plant or maybe a bigger potted plant, and it's got soil in it, and you never change it out, which means that all the microbial life underneath there at some point is going to die. It doesn't get the nutrients it needs. So unless you really know how to work with, okay, I got to add this and I got to take that away, or I got to put some compost in, or I've got to, switch my pots every couple of years and put some new soil in, you're going to probably end up killing your plant. It's just kind of the way it goes. That happens way, way less if you're working with something outdoors, because most of the microbiology will stay pretty healthy as long as you don't put any toxins in it. So that's a big one right there. Tree People is great, and they're a lot of fun to do volunteer stuff with, and you can learn very quickly. The Botanic Gardens allows people to practice doing things outside, and there's different training classes there as well. And I think one of the other really fun things that people love to do is vegetable gardens, or some kind of organic food gardens that you have as community gardens. And you can be paired up with someone that's done it a little while, and that way, you make a new friend because you're living in a new community. It might be fun to make a new friend, but also you don't have to solve all the problems on your own, because most of them have figured out how to do it. So, you get paired up with someone, or maybe someone has a plot, a couple down from your plot, and you go and you make sure that you meet up at the same time, and they can show you what works and what doesn't, and which plants are best to start with, which crops are more difficult, and which ones are easier. So that would be my suggestions on just getting out there and trying it. Don't be intimidated. If you don't like to get your hands dirty, then go buy yourself a good pair of gloves.
I like those suggestions. See, my mom tried to do a veggie garden, I think maybe a couple times, at her house in Louisiana, and it just didn't work out for her. Probably a couple reasons that were mentioned in this episode.
Yeah.
But I think, if she wanted to try it again, that'd be a really good idea for her to pair up with somebody.
Absolutely.
And as far as planting a tree goes, I think that's a really good idea. I know Michael Alcazar, who you and I have both spent a week workshop with, he has his plant tree on September 21st day, and I think I'm going to do that.
Yay! I love that. Well, if you're starting with an indoor tree, the money tree is a good one.
I think I'll do an outdoor tree. I hadn't even thought about an indoor tree.
Nope, topiaries are fun for inside. Outdoor trees, there's a lot of wonderful fruiting trees. So please, please, please provide. Don't just buy a tree that looks beautiful. Try to buy one that actually helps. There's a lot that provide shelter for animals, where animals can nest as well, especially birds, where a lot of animals overwinter because it provides warmth in certain trees. Obviously, the evergreens are really important for that. But then you have trees that provide different kinds of nuts, and that's great for the squirrels. So you've got fruits. There's all kinds of choices. And go and talk to someone at your local plant nursery. Local. It's very important. Find something that is for your region, not something that's just beautiful. You'll find a beautiful one.
Okay, I'll definitely do that.
Great.
Thank you, Wanda, for being on Modern Ways today. It was a pleasure to have you. Thank you for all the information you provided, and for your time, and for just your positive energy.
Well, I appreciate you being out there. Thank you. And for having people look at their landscape as part of their real estate transaction, and trying to make that and incorporate that into a more organic and healthy way around their home. So thank you for what you do.
Yeah. Well, I will see you next time.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Explorers of Modern Ways, thank you so much for tuning in today. You can find more of me on Instagram at Moving with Madison, and YouTube, Moving with Madison. YouTube is where I post a video recording of each episode, so you can watch along if you please. I hope you learned something new today, and that helps you take a tangible step towards creating your eco-friendly home.